In a dying cattle town where stories fade faster than paint on a barn, a quiet rancher buys a wild-eyed woman off a transport wagon, thinking he's rescuing her. Turns out she doesn't want saving, and neither of them knows the other's past could burn everything down. She came in chains. He carried scars. Neither of them wanted love, but they might have just found a reason to fight again. This is a Wild West love story by Saddlehorn Stories, full audiobook experience. The crowd gathered thick and mean in the sun-baked square of Cross Spur, a fly-speck town where mercy was in shorter supply than whiskey. Dust hung in the air like breath held too long, and the wooden platform creaked under the weight of the chained woman they'd dragged up like a feral dog. She didn't cry, didn't plead, just stared straight ahead with blood on her bottom lip and a wildness in her eyes that made folks step back. Torn sleeves clung to lean arms coiled like a spring, and every time a man tried to touch her, she bared her teeth like she might bite. One already had the marks to prove it. Colt Rayner stood at the edge of the crowd, silent, boots planted, hat low. He hadn't come for this. He'd driven into town for fencing wire and horse feed. But when she turned her head just slightly, their eyes locked, just a flicker, a breath, and something shifted in his gut. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the square, greasy and impatient. Next up, one hellcat of a woman, caught stealing from the Prescott line, bound for work or worse, sold as is, no complaints taken. Some men laughed, others spat. Colt didn't move. The woman scanned the crowd with sharp eyes. She looked for an out, not a savior, but there were none, not in this town. Her wrists were raw from iron cuffs. A bruise darkened her cheek like smeared ink. She was trouble. That much was clear, and he stepped forward anyway. 200, Colt said, voice low and dry. The crowd fell quiet. The price was steep. She wasn't young enough to fetch that from the Letchers, and too wild for housework. A murmur rolled through like thunder on a dry plain. Do I hear 220? The auctioneer called, nervous now. No one answered. Sold! The woman didn't flinch as Colt stepped up. She looked him dead in the eye, the kind of stare you'd expect from a mountain lion caught in a snare. You own me now? She rasped, voice ragged. Colt shook his head once. I don't own people. She didn't believe him, not yet. He took the chain from the deputy's hand and walked her past the gawking townsfolk without another word. The wind picked up, brushing grit across their boots and whispering secrets only the land remembered. Out here in this forgotten corner of the Wild West, folks didn't ask questions unless they wanted bullets for answers. Back at his truck, Colt unlocked her cuffs. She rubbed her wrists, wary, ready to bolt. But she didn't. Why'd you buy me? She asked. Colt opened the passenger door. Figured you'd rather ride than rot. She hesitated, then climbed in. He shut the door behind her. Not gentle, not cruel, just final. As the engine rumbled to life and they pulled away from the square, neither of them spoke. But in the quiet between them, something restless stirred. And so began a Wild West love story. Not of flowers or soft words, but of grit, fire, and the slow, dangerous business of healing. The old pickup creaked as Colt guided it down the dirt road out of Cross Spur. The sun had dipped just enough to paint long shadows across the hills, but the heat still clung to everything like regret. Juna, if that was her real name, sat stiff beside him, arms folded tight, the remnants of rusted shackles still visible on her wrists. She hadn't said a word since the truck door closed. Colt hadn't either. The cab smelled like leather, dust, and old tobacco. Her scent didn't belong, earthy, wild, edged with blood and stubborn fear. She stared out the window like she was cataloging every turn of the road for a future escape. You can run, Colt finally said, not looking at her. But I wouldn't, not out here. I didn't ask your advice, she snapped, her voice hoarse and fraying. You always bring women home in chains? Nope. She turned to face him now, eyes flashing. Then what the hell was that back there? Colt's jaw flexed. Didn't sit right, that's all. He shifted gears with a hard jerk, and they climbed into the hills. She looked back down the road at the town growing smaller behind them. Men like you don't just step in out of the goodness of their hearts. Colt let the silence answer her. A hawk screeched overhead as the land stretched wide around them. Fences sagged. Grass swayed yellow and dry. It was a country half forgotten, half feral. The kind of place where folks buried secrets with their dead. You got a name? She asked, quieter this time. Colt, she snorted. Figures. You? She paused too long. Juna. Didn't sound like a lie, but didn't sound like the truth either. Colt flicked a glance her way. Bruises bloomed down her arm like old paint, and there was a cut at her collarbone that looked like it came from barbed wire or something meaner. You don't have to explain, he said. I wasn't going to. The ranch came into view, a wide sprawl of land cradled between two ridgelines. Fence posts leaned like tired old men. A windmill creaked in rhythm with the fading day. It wasn't much, but it stood, and in a place like this, that counted for something. As they pulled into the drive, Juna tensed. If you're thinking of trying something, just know, Colt cut her off. You're not locked in, but don't mistake quiet for soft. He parked. The engine ticked as it cooled. She got out slow, eyes scanning for threats. Colt led her inside, boots echoing on worn hardwood. Guest room's down the hall. There's a bolt on the door. From the inside. She blinked at him. I don't need a guard, she said. You ain't got one. He turned away and left her standing in the hallway, alone but unchained for the first time in weeks. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the whispers of the Wild West through cracked windows and broken fences. And deep inside her chest, for just a second, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Uncertainty. The screen door slapped shut behind them, echoing through the empty house like a warning shot. Juna followed Colt through the narrow hallway, her footsteps cautious on the worn hardwood. The air inside was cooler, still holding the night from before, but no less tense. Colt pointed to a room at the end of the hall. That's yours. Bed's clean. Bathroom's across the way. She didn't move. Her eyes slid down the hallway to the bolts on the window, the weight in his walk, the way his hand never strayed far from his hip. Like a man always 1 second from drawing, she crossed the threshold and stood inside the room. It was plain, old dresser, thin curtains, clean sheets like he said. But her eyes locked onto the doorframe. There was a bolt, a heavy one. On the outside, she turned around, slow. You planning to lock me in? She asked. Colt leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Only if you give me reason to. I don't run from what I can kill, she said flatly. His expression didn't change. But something in the room shifted. Juna stepped forward, close enough to smell the dust on his collar and the faint musk of worn leather. Her face tilted up, defiant. You're quiet, she said. Too quiet. Some of us talk less when we've lived more. You don't scare me. I'm not trying to. They stood like that, unmoving. Something sharp passed between them, charged, dangerous. Not quite trust, not yet hate. She caught a flicker in his eyes, like maybe he wasn't sure if he wanted to shove her out the door or pull her in. Colt finally moved, stepping back. He slid the bolt across the outside of the door, but only halfway. It clicked lightly, not locked, just there. Up to you, he muttered. She shut the door without answering. Inside, the quiet pressed close. The mattress creaked when she sat. The window faced west, where the horizon still glowed orange. Juna stared at it, fingers tracing the faint line where the cuffs had bruised her skin. She hadn't lied, she didn't run. But she also didn't trust men who claimed to be different, not in the Wild West, where kindness was often just a slower kind of cruelty. Across the hallway, Colt poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a chipped glass and stared out the front window. His hands didn't shake, but they tightened just enough to show it. This wasn't how he planned it. He hadn't brought her here out of charity. And it sure as hell wasn't love. But as the last light dipped behind the hills, he realized something was waking in him, something dangerous. She was fire, and he'd spent too long in the cold. Out here, folks didn't believe in fairy tales. But sometimes the dust blew up a different kind of story, a Wild West love story. By morning, the clouds had rolled in thick and low, dragging the weight of a storm behind them. Colt loaded the back of the truck with feed sacks and tools, boots crunching on gravel as thunder growled in the distance. Juna stood under the awning of the porch, arms crossed, shirt damp with sweat from hauling hay earlier. "You ever worked a cattle fence?" he asked, not looking at her. She shrugged. "I know how to drive a post and fix barbed wire. Unless your fences are made of gold." He threw her a pair of gloves. "Storm's coming. Let's get ahead of it." The truck jolted over the dirt trail, tires spitting up mud as the sky darkened. They passed broken fencing, slouched posts, and scattered cows huddling under mesquite. Juna watched the sky with a hawk's eye, tense, reading every shift in wind like a warning. By the time they reached the north pasture, the rain had started. Cold, sideways, stinging like spit from the devil's mouth. Colt moved fast, checking posts, tying wire. Juna worked beside him without a word, her shirt soaked through, hair plastered to her face, sweat and rain blurring into one. When the thunder cracked overhead, a yearling spooked and bolted toward the tree line. "Shit," Colt muttered, dropping his pliers. Juna didn't hesitate. She was on the horse before Colt even turned. Bareback, no saddle, rain blinding her. But she rode like she was born in the storm. Colt stood frozen for a second, watching her silhouette vanish into the brush. 15 minutes later, she came back soaked and wild-eyed, her legs covered in scratches, the calf roped and walking beside her. She dismounted with a grunt and handed Colt the rope like it was nothing. "I thought you said you weren't running," he said, unable to stop the edge in his voice. She stepped close, breath heavy, shirt clinging to every curve of her chest. "I didn't run," she said. "I chased." Lightning flashed above them, casting sharp shadows across her face. For a moment, the storm outside quieted beneath the one between them. Her lips parted, just slightly. He looked at her, really looked, and felt something coil inside him. They stood there, soaked, shaking, inches from heat they weren't ready to admit. Colt turned away first. "Let's get the hell out of this rain," he said. The ride back was quiet, except for the storm hammering the truck's roof. Juna's fingers brushed her lips more than once, as if remembering something that almost happened. Back at the ranch, she took the guest room again without a word. Colt stared at the fire, whiskey untouched beside him. He'd been alone a long time, too long, and now he wasn't sure if this woman was a storm he could outlast or one he'd let take him under. One thing was certain. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was the start of something dangerous, something real, something like a Wild West love story, fierce, broken, and begging for ruin. Out here in the Wild West, that was the only kind worth telling. If you're enjoying this Wild West love story so far, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to Saddlehorn Stories. Now back to the story. The next time Colt went into Cross Spur, he brought Juna with him. She didn't want to go, not because she was afraid, but because of how people stared. The town hadn't forgotten the auction, and Juna hadn't forgiven it. Main Street was little more than 2 blocks of sagging storefronts, a feed store, a diner, a gas station that hadn't updated its pumps since the 70s. But still, every step they took felt like a gunshot in a quiet church. Colt walked steady, head up. Juna followed close, chin high, eyes cutting sideways with every whisper. "Is that her?" one woman hissed behind a car door. "That's the wild one, the one he bought. Thought he had more sense than that." They passed the hardware store. Colt picked up fencing staples and motor oil, while Juna drifted down an aisle, eyes scanning every exit like she expected someone to lunge at her. At the counter, the old man behind the register gave Colt a long look. "You keeping her busy out there?" he asked. "Heard she's a handful?" Colt's jaw ticked. "She can handle herself." The man snorted. "That's what I'm afraid of." When they left, Juna stopped by the truck, her voice low. They act like I burned the damn town down. They just don't understand you, Colt said. No, she corrected. They think they do. That's worse. He didn't argue, couldn't. The truth was, he didn't understand her either. They grabbed lunch at Ruby's Diner, the only place in town with real coffee and half-decent pie. The bell above the door jingled like an alarm as they walked in, drawing every eye in the place. Juna sat with her back to the wall. Colt noticed. The waitress came over with a smile too tight to be kind. "What'll it be?" "Coffee," Colt said. "2 plates, special." The waitress didn't write anything down. Just stared a moment too long at Juna's bruised cheek, then walked off. A man 2 booths down leaned toward his buddy. "I heard she's on the run from something nasty." "They always are," his friend said. "But trouble don't leave quiet." Juna didn't flinch. She just sipped her water and stared out the window like the town wasn't there. After they ate, Colt paid, and they left in silence. It wasn't until they were halfway home, tires kicking dust into the late afternoon sky, that Juna finally spoke. "You think they're wrong?" Colt kept his eyes on the road. "About what?" "About me." He didn't answer right away. "I think," he said, "then they ain't got the first damn clue who you really are." She looked at him then, really looked. For a second, the hardness in her eyes cracked. Out here in the Wild West, folks loved stories more than truth, especially the kind soaked in judgment. But sometimes, if you looked hard enough, you found a different kind of tale unfolding. A Wild West love story, one slow and quiet and scarred as hell. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of one. Ruby's Diner turned into Ruby's Saloon after dark. The lights got lower, the jukebox got louder, and the kind of men who drank just to feel something showed up in dirty boots with knuckles ready for trouble. Colt didn't want to be there, but he owed Wade Hastings a bottle and a handshake over a busted water line that nearly flooded the back pasture. He didn't expect Juna to come, but when she saw him grab his keys, she threw on a flannel and followed without a word. By the time they walked through the doors, half the town was already buzzed. A few heads turned, someone muttered. The bar reeked of sweat, old smoke, and spilled bourbon. Colt spotted Wade in the corner, waved him over. Juna leaned on the rail, watching the room like a caged animal. Her eyes tracked every motion, every bottle lifted, every man who looked at her too long. That's when he walked up. A broad-shouldered ranch hand, face red from drink, swagger turned up too high. "Well, hell," he slurred. "Look what the quiet cowboy dragged in." Juna didn't answer. "You the one from the auction, right?" He grinned like a wolf. "Heard you bite." Colt turned too late. The man reached for her arm. She broke his nose, fast and mean. No warning. A clean snap of her elbow up and across his face. Blood sprayed the floor. The bar went silent for half a second before it erupted. 2 more men lunged from behind. Colt shoved one back into a table, chairs tipped, glass shattered. Juna spun, ducked a swing, and landed a punch that dropped a second man to his knees. Then it was over. Sheriff Harlan showed up, pissed and winded. "Get the hell out of here!" And he barked at Colt. "Take her with you." Outside, the wind whipped cold. Juna's chest heaved, knuckles raw. Colt looked at her, eyes dark. "You could have just walked away." "I did," she said. Then he touched me. They stood there in the flickering light from the saloon windows, breath turning white. Colt had seen fights. Started some, ended more. But something about the way she moved, like the world owed her blood and she meant to collect it, shook something deep inside him. "You don't scare easy," he muttered. "You either." The air crackled between them, the space close and hot and humming. His hand brushed hers, just barely, and she didn't pull away. Back at the ranch, neither of them said much. But she didn't go straight to her room. She stood by the fire a while, watching it burn, him beside her. That night, Colt lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He knew the town wouldn't let it go. New folks would start asking louder questions, and still he couldn't bring himself to care. Because somewhere in the middle of this chaos, something had changed. This wasn't just trouble. This was the middle of a Wild West love story, the kind where fists spoke louder than flowers. And out in the Wild West, that was sometimes the only kind that lasted. The night air was thick with the smell of charred cedar and old whiskey. Crickets sawed through the silence as Colt stood on the back porch, shirt draped over one shoulder, bottle in hand, muscles tight as the ridgeline. He thought he was alone, until he heard the screen door whisper open. Juna stepped out barefoot, arms crossed against the chill. She said nothing at first, just watched the shadows stretch across the yard like long-forgotten sins. "You always drink alone?" she asked. Colt took a sip, slow. "Usually." She moved to stand beside him, close but not close enough to touch. Her eyes drifted over his chest, then caught on something. A long, jagged scar slashed across his left shoulder, pale and twisted like melted wax hardened over time. "What did that?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer. "Gunshot," she pushed. "Bar fight gone wrong? Fire." She glanced at him. "Barn went up," he said. "I was 16. My brother was inside." A pause. "Did he make it out?" Colt's jaw tightened. "No." Silence. Juna stepped a little closer, her voice softer now. "You blame yourself?" He didn't nod, didn't speak, but the weight of it hung between them like a noose. Juna looked at the scar again, then at him. "I've seen men with wounds like that, but yours doesn't look like it ever closed right." He turned to her then, eyes shadowed but burning. "Neither did the rest of me." She reached out, slow, and brushed her fingers along the edge of the scar. His breath caught, just slightly. Her hand lingered, her touch both gentle and electric. For a second, the world went quiet. No past, no future, just firelight and skin and everything unsaid. "You don't let people in, do you?" she whispered. He looked at her, and it wasn't lust in his eyes. It was fear. The fear of needing someone again, of being needed. "I'm trying," he said, voice rough. She let her hand fall. "Then try harder." She turned and walked back inside, leaving the screen door swinging behind her. Colt stood there a long time, bottle forgotten, scar burning like it had just been made. He didn't chase her. Not yet. But something had changed. She'd seen him. Not the quiet cowboy, not the man who kept to himself, but the broken boy who watched everything he loved burn down in a blaze he couldn't stop. And she hadn't looked away. Out in the Wild West, scars were currency. But for once, his had bought something more than silence. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just survival. Maybe this was the start of a Wild West love story with teeth. One born of fire and healed in flickers, not flowers. The coyotes had been howling too close the last few nights. That's what Colt told himself when he grabbed the rifle and headed toward the north line at dawn. The air was still, sky bruised with morning haze, but something about the silence felt wrong. He didn't know Juna had already been out there. Didn't know she'd found the tracks first. Boot prints, too deep for a ranch hand, too careful to be a drifter. She didn't wake him. She didn't need to. Instead, she'd gone out with nothing but a rope, a bowie knife, and that cold-blooded calm she wore like armor. He found her half a mile past the barn, crouched behind a cedar tree, eyes fixed ahead. "What are you doing?" he whispered. She didn't look back. "Waiting." "For what?" She just nodded. That's when Colt saw him. A man creeping through the tall grass, slow and deliberate. Black ball cap, tactical boots, not local. Colt raised the rifle. "Don't," Juna muttered. "I want to know who he works for." She moved like a shadow, low, fast, and before Colt could stop her, she was behind the man, knife at his throat. "Drop it," she hissed. The man froze, his pistol hit the dirt. "Tell me who sent you." The man swallowed. "I ain't talking to..." She pressed the blade. Okay. My name's Deeks. I was sent to bring you back." Colt stepped closer. "Back where?" Deeks glanced at him, confused. "You don't know? Try me." Her face is on a damn private list, high priority. Not for arrest, retrieval, She don't belong to you. Juna's eyes went flat. Say that again, she said, quieter. The man hesitated. Your property. She cracked him across the temple with the butt of the knife and let him drop to the grass. He's not wrong, she said, turning to Colt. Not in their eyes. Colt's grip tightened on the rifle. What the hell did you do? Juna looked away. I escaped. That's all you need to know, for now. She knelt and zip-tied the man's wrists behind his back, then stood over him like she'd done this 100 times before. Colt stared at her, the ground shifting beneath everything he thought he knew. She wasn't just running, she was hunted, and whoever was after her had money, muscle, and reach. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Because I didn't think I'd stay this long. They dragged Deeks to the old smokehouse and locked him inside. No phone, no weapons, no way to call for backup. Back at the porch, Juna lit a cigarette with shaky hands. Her walls had cracked, but now they were steel again. You still think this is just a ranch problem? She asked. Colt didn't answer. The Wild West had never really died. It had just gone underground. Still full of men who wanted to own women and burn those who wouldn't kneel. But Colt wasn't one of them. He looked at her, soaked in stormlight and scars, and made a silent promise. This might not be the love story they wanted, but it was the kind they were in. A Wild West love story where survival was the slowest kind of trust. Colt stood in the old smokehouse, the door creaking behind him. Deeks sat on the floor, wrists still zip-tied, mouth bloodied from trying to chew through the gag. He froze when he saw Colt step inside alone. No Juna this time. Colt shut the door and bolted it behind him. The air was damp and heavy, thick with the ghosts of meat and ash. You know, Colt said, voice low, I used to think a man could live clean out here, work hard, keep his head down, let the past rot behind him. Deeks didn't respond, just watched him with wide, twitching eyes. But then someone puts a knife to your world, Colt continued, and suddenly clean don't matter, only fire. He stepped forward slowly, no rifle, no bravado, just a length of coiled wire in his hand. Who sent you? Deeks shook his head. Colt crouched down, calm, controlled. He looked Deeks straight in the eye, and for the first time, there was no softness left, no forgiveness, just a storm that had finally decided to roll in. You ever burn alive? Colt asked. Deeks flinched. I have. Took my brother. Took half of me with it. And now I got a woman out there. One who don't flinch, don't lie, and don't beg. And you think I'm gonna let you drag her back to wherever the hell she ran from? He uncoiled the wire. This is the part where you start talking, or I stop being the nice one. Deeks cracked. It didn't take much. Some men only wore loyalty as long as their blood stayed inside. She was taken, Deeks coughed. Not bought, taken, locked up, owned by a man with a ranch the size of a county. He's not law. He owns law. What's his name? Deeks hesitated. Colt pressed the wire gently against his throat. Price, Deeks choked. Silas Price, oil money, land deals, thinks she belongs to him, thinks everyone does. Colt stood slowly. He didn't say a word as he walked to the door. Didn't look back. But outside the wind had picked up and the skies were turning. Dust blew sideways across the fields, whispering old songs about vengeance and blood. He found June out by the fence line, hammer in hand. She turned at the sound of his boots. Well? She asked. He told me everything. She didn't smile, didn't relax, just nodded once. Then you know what's coming? Colt stared at her, this woman who carried her own storms like armor and knew without question what side he was on. You ever kill a man, Juna? He asked. Not yet. Guess we're both due. And in that moment, as the wind howled through the dying grass, Colt stopped being a man trying to stay clean and became the kind of man willing to burn it all down. Because out in the Wild West, justice didn't wear a badge. And love wasn't a poem. It was a loaded gun, a silent vow, and a reason to fight like hell. A Wild West love story, carved in scars and ash, The ranch was too quiet that night. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Crickets muted, coyotes gone, the kind of silence that made the air feel thick, like something was crawling under your skin. Colt sat on the front steps, boots off, rifle across his knees. The porch light flickered overhead, moths dancing in the glow. He hadn't said much since coming back from the smokehouse. Juna stepped out, arms folded, hair wet from the shower. She wore one of his old flannel shirts, sleeves rolled high, bare legs brushing against the hem. He saw her but didn't look long. "You expecting someone?" she asked, nodding to the rifle. Colt didn't answer right away. "After what that man said," he murmured, "I'd be stupid not to." She stepped down beside him and sat, close enough to feel the warmth of his arm. They didn't speak for a while. "Deeks talked," she said softly. "Didn't think he would. He broke easy." She looked at Colt. "You scare people, but you don't show it." Colt's mouth twitched. "You scare him more." She smiled, barely. Then the quiet rolled back in, thick and tight. Juna tilted her head to the sky. Stars like shotgun scatter. No clouds, no moon. "You ever wonder what your life could have been if things had gone different?" she asked. "Every damn day." He turned, finally meeting her eyes. "But then I think maybe this is what it was always going to be. Maybe we don't get different." She looked at him for a long time. Her walls weren't down, but they were thinner. She could see through them now. So could he. "I was born in a lie," she said, voice nearly a whisper. "Raised on it. Thought I'd die with it. But somehow I ended up here." "With me," he said. Her lip twitched. "Lucky me." He almost smiled. A gust of wind stirred the porch. The rifle shifted in his lap. She leaned in, slow. Her hand rested lightly on his leg. Not in a way that asked for anything, just to say, "I'm still here." He covered it with his own. For a heartbeat, they sat in silence, hands touching, breath in sync, both of them just waiting. For what, they didn't know. This wasn't lust, not yet. But it was heat, the kind that burns slow, low, waiting for permission to turn into fire. "I won't let them take you," Colt said. "I won't let them take you either," Juna replied. Out in the distance, a coyote howled, then another, then silence again. This wasn't peace, but it was the closest they'd ever come. In the Wild West, sleep was a gamble. Love was worse. But sometimes, two broken things could find stillness. And maybe, just maybe, it could grow into something stronger. A Wild West love story, carved not in kisses, but in quiet. The next morning, Colt found Juna in the barn. She wasn't feeding horses or fixing tack. She was just sitting in the loft, legs dangling off the edge, staring at nothing like it was saying something back. He didn't call her name, just climbed up slow and sat beside her. After a long silence, she spoke. His name was Silas Price. Colt nodded. Deeks said, "He owns half of Eastwater County, oil, land, judges, even a sheriff or two." "You his wife?" She laughed, but it was hollow. "Not by choice." Colt didn't push. "I was 17 when he picked me," she said. "Told my family he'd take care of us. Put a ranch in my daddy's name, gave my mama cash. All they had to do was sign, and they did." Colt's jaw tightened. "I spent 6 years locked up," she continued. "No phone, no keys, no friends, just cameras and guards and rules that changed every time he got bored." She looked at Colt now, eyes wet but hard. "I didn't run because I was scared. I ran because if I stayed, I'd stop being real." Colt stared at her. "You killed him?" "No," she hesitated. "But I wish I had." "Then what?" "He had another girl, a new one, young, even younger than I was. And one night I snapped, beat one of his men near to death with a branding iron. Took the girl, took a truck, left them both bleeding." She waited for Colt to look at her different. He didn't. Instead, he said, "That girl still with you?" "She's in Wyoming with a rancher's wife who don't ask questions." "Good," Juna blinked. "That's it? You think less of yourself than you should," Colt said. "You didn't just run, you saved someone." She looked away. "I'm wanted, Colt. I've got a price on my head, and they won't stop until someone collects it." "I'm not someone." "I know." They sat there a while longer. the hayloft warm from the sun leaking through the slats. Below them, a horse pawed the dirt. Somewhere outside, a hawk cried out like it knew the truth and didn't care who it hurt. Colt turned to her again. If you stay here, it's war. I know. You sure? She reached over, rested her hand on his chest, right over the scar. I'm sure. Because this wasn't just hiding anymore. It wasn't just survival. It was a stand. Out in the Wild West, the only thing more dangerous than love was a woman with nothing left to lose. And Colt had just chosen to stand beside her. Together, they were building a new kind of tale. Not clean, not easy, but real. A Wild West love story with teeth. The first thing Colt smelled was smoke. He shot up from the porch swing, rifle forgotten, heart hammering in his chest. The sky behind the barn was lit orange, flickering, growing. Juna! He yelled. She was already running barefoot across the yard, her hair flying wild, eyes wide with dread. No words passed between them. Just motion. Just instinct. The barn was on fire. Not an accident, not a spark. This was deliberate. Gasoline. Colt burst through the side door as flames crawled up the rafters. The horses were screaming, one already kicking at its stall door, wild-eyed and panicked. He didn't stop to think, just moved. Juno was at his heels, grabbing halters, shouting commands like a soldier under fire. She was fearless, fast, methodical. They moved in rhythm, open, led, release, repeat. The heat clawed at their skin. Smoke poured from the loft, thick and choking. The last horse wouldn't budge. A black gelding, shaking so bad it nearly collapsed. I got him, Colt shouted over the roar. Get out! She hesitated, then vanished into the smoke. Colt wrapped his arms around the gelding's neck, whispering low, steady. Finally, the horse bolted out the open door just as a beam cracked and came crashing down behind them. He stumbled out into the yard, coughing, eyes watering. Juno was waiting. She ran to him, grabbed his face in her hands, searching for burns, for blood, for something that said he was still there. You all right? She gasped. He nodded barely. Behind them, the barn groaned and folded in on itself with a thunderous collapse. Neighbors would say they heard it miles off. They stood there, covered in soot and sweat, the fire casting shadows across their faces. He took her hand without a word, gripped it tight. They sent someone, she said. More than one, Colt muttered. That wasn't just a warning. That was a message. I know. The flames crackled and the sky began to glow with first light. Ash rained down like snow. I'm not leaving, Juna said, voice hard. I know, Colt answered. Neither am I. He looked at what was left of the barn, what he'd built with his own hands. The last piece of the life he'd tried to build before she came along. Burned to nothing. But the fire hadn't taken her. And maybe that was the point. In the Wild West, they used to say fire purified things. Maybe it still did. He pulled her close, not for comfort, but for resolve. They weren't hiding anymore. They were standing. This wasn't just about one man's ranch or one woman's escape. It was about fighting for something that had started as survival and turned into something worth bleeding for. A Wild West love story, forged in fire and far from over. He pulled up in a black truck with government plates, polished like a coffin. Dust didn't even cling to it. The engine purred like it belonged to a man who didn't need to raise his voice to get what he wanted. Colt watched from the porch, rifle across his lap. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a tailored vest, polished boots, and a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Colt Rayner, he said, voice smooth as oil. Mind if I come up? Juna stepped into the doorway behind Colt, froze. The man smiled wider. There she is. Colt didn't move. Name? Silas Price, he said, touching the brim of a hat too clean to be real. And I believe you've got something of mine? She ain't yours, Colt said, voice low. Price's smile didn't falter. You say that like the law agrees with you. You ain't the law. Silas reached into his coat and produced a badge. Deputy U.S. Marshal. Colt didn't blink. Bought that at a pawn shop? Paperwork's real. I'm deputized in 2 states and own half of a third. You think I won't bring fire down on this place? I think you already tried. Price glanced at the burned-out barn, then back at Colt. Fire's just the beginning, he said, calm. You don't know what she did. I know enough. Juna stepped forward now, chin high, shoulders back. I'm not running, she said. I didn't give you that option, Price replied. Colt stood. She's not going anywhere. Silas looked him over like he was weighing whether Colt was worth a bullet. Then he smiled again. I'll give you 24 hours, he said. After that, I won't be so civil. He tipped his hat, turned, and walked back to the truck like he hadn't just promised war. The door slammed. The engine growled. Then he was gone, dust curling up behind him. Colt turned to Juna. She didn't speak, just stared at the road, jaw clenched. You okay? He asked. No, she whispered, but I will be. That night, they loaded the truck with rifles, filled canteens, mapped exits. There was no illusion left, no hope of walking away clean. He has a badge, Juna said, tightening a bolt on the fence line. So do cowards, Colt replied. They worked in silence, side by side in the dying light. It wasn't a plan, it was a stand, and maybe that was all they needed. Out in the Wild West, sometimes all that separated right from wrong was which side of the barrel you stood on. And this wasn't just a woman and a man trying to outrun the past. This was a Wild West love story, where love meant fighting. Fighting dirty, fighting loud, fighting until the ground itself remembered their names. By sunrise, Colt had the truck loaded, the horses saddled, and the wireline cut. They weren't running. They were hunting. Silas Price had made one mistake. He underestimated the man beside the woman he once owned. Juna pulled her hair back in a tight braid, cinched the leather on her boots, and loaded the 30-30 without saying a word. She didn't need to. Colt already knew. They weren't waiting 24 hours. The first stop was the airstrip out by Halberton Bluff, where Price kept a twin prop for quick escapes. It was parked, gassed, and guarded by two men in matching jackets and matching scowls. Colt drove slow, lights off, windows down. Juna leaned out the passenger side with her revolver, just like they'd practiced the night before. One man raised his arm to wave. Juna shot the engine block of their truck first, then the radio tower. Colt rammed through the fence. The guards dove, fired wild. One bullet grazed the hood, another shattered glass. Then Colt was on foot, rifle up, fast and brutal. Juna moved like smoke, swift, sharp, unpredictable. 10 seconds, that's all it took. When the dust cleared, both men were zip-tied to a post with duct tape over their mouths. The plane sat untouched, useless. This sends a message, Colt said, kicking their radios into the weeds. Juna lit a match and dropped it in the gas puddle under the guard shack. Flames licked up fast. Back in the truck, neither spoke for a while. You think he'll back off? She asked, voice tight. No, Colt said. He'll come harder. Good. She didn't look at him, but he felt the heat of her gaze all the same. He thinks I'm just some wild girl who got lucky, she said. He doesn't understand what it takes to survive being owned. Colt gripped the wheel. Let's make sure he learns. By the time they reached the ridge overlooking Silas's eastern property line, the sun was bleeding into the sky, turning everything gold and sharp. Colt cut the engine. They'd scoped the place before, just enough to know the layout. 5 men on rotation. Motion sensors on the front drive. A secondary fence behind the stables. What's the plan? She asked. He turned to her, voice even. We shut him down, piece by piece. And then? He looked at her a long beat. Then, we finish what he started. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about taking back what had been stolen. About showing the world that sometimes the ones they count out are the ones who burn it all down. Out here in the Wild West, justice didn't ride a white horse. Sometimes it rode with a woman who refused to bow, and a man who finally stood the hell up. Together, they were the kind of storm even the land remembered. A Wild West love story, with blood on the boots and smoke in the sky. They rode out just before sunset, not in the truck, on horseback. Colt's paint gelding, wide-chested and loyal. Juna's chestnut mare leaning fast with fire in her eyes. No headlights, no engine noise, just hooves on dirt and the thunder in their chests. The plan wasn't perfect. It wasn't even safe, but it was theirs. Silas Price's estate sat like a fortress on the hill. Steel gates, high walls, security lights sweeping in slow, predictable arcs. But every fortress has a crack. They found it on the western edge, where the floodplain ran dry. Colt pulled his horse up beneath the rocks and scanned the line. Juna dismounted beside him, checking her rifle, then the revolver at her thigh. "You ready?" he asked. She looked at him, eyes dark. "I was born ready." He almost smiled, almost. They waited for the light to pass, then slipped under the fence, through tall grass, up the back slope where the guard rotation was lazy and bored. The first man didn't see Juna coming. 1 second he was scratching his neck, next he was out cold in the dirt. Colt handled the second, clean and quiet. They moved like a dance, two halves of a storm. By the time the main house came into view, they'd cleared a path of silence behind them. The front door was locked. Didn't matter, Juna had the code. "Learned it on the way out," she whispered. Click. They slipped inside. Rich wood floors, velvet furniture, dead silence. The kind of place that screamed power, but reeked of fear. Footsteps echoed above them. Colt pointed. Stairs. They moved. At the top was Silas's office, heavy oak door, lamps still glowing inside. Colt turned to Juna. "This is it." She nodded. "Let me go first." He didn't argue. She kicked the door open. Silas stood behind his desk, tie loosened, a drink in his hand. He didn't look surprised. "I figured it'd be you," he said, "but I thought you'd bring the law." "I brought better," she said. Colt stepped in behind her. Silas smirked. "So this is the cowboy. Quiet type. Bet you think she's worth dying for." Colt raised the rifle. "I don't think anything," he said. "I know." Silas reached for something under the desk. Juna fired first. One shot. Not to kill, not yet. The bullet hit the desk leg, sent splinters flying. Silas froze. "Try it," she said. He didn't. They stepped closer, and for the first time, Juna saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. Not of death, but of being outplayed by the woman he thought he owned. Out in the Wild West, this would have been a duel. But this wasn't the Old West. This was now. And she wasn't looking for justice. She was looking to end it. Together, they weren't just surviving anymore. They were writing their own ending. A Wild West love story, lit by gunpowder and grit. And the final chapter was just a trigger pull away. Silas Price bled slow, not from a bullet, but from the look on Juna's face as she stepped closer, steady, quiet, unblinking. "I'm not yours," she said. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. Colt kept the rifle trained on his chest. Juna took her time, pulled a flash drive from her coat pocket, and tossed it on the desk. "Evidence," she said. "Names, tapes, every crooked deal, every underage girl, every badge you bought." Silas stared at it, pale now. "You think that'll hold up?" he croaked. "It doesn't need to," Colt replied. "It just needs to surface." Sirens echoed in the far distance. Federal ones. Juna smiled. "You didn't just piss off a runaway," she said. "You pissed off someone with nothing left to lose and no reason to be afraid." Price made a last lunge. Too slow. Colt cracked him across the face with the rifle stock. He dropped like a sack of bricks. Blood pooled. It was over. They didn't run. They waited on the porch of that big white house as red and blue lights crested the ridge. When the agents poured in, Colt raised his hands. Juna didn't move. One step forward. "You, Juna Cross?" She nodded. The agent glanced at Colt. "And him?" She didn't hesitate. "My partner." They were cuffed, questioned, but not charged. The flash drive told the rest of the story. So did the bruises, the scars, the dead guards. The witnesses Price thought were silenced. 2 weeks later, Colt stood outside a courthouse in New Mexico, waiting for her to walk free. She did. Hair tied back, clean shirt, same steel in her eyes. You came, she said. He nodded. Told you I would. She stepped up close, and this time she kissed him. Not soft, not desperate. Certain. He kissed her back. There was no wedding, no vows, no fairy tale. Just two people who survived something most never could. They bought a piece of land up near Taos. Small cabin, a few horses, a porch swing. Some nights were quiet, others weren't. But every one of them was theirs. Out in the Wild West, stories like theirs didn't always end well. But this one did. Because this wasn't just survival. It was grit, fire, and the kind of love that doesn't flinch. A Wild West love story, scarred and sacred. And when folks asked how they met, Colt would smile and say, I bought a girl no man could handle and found a partner I'd ride through hell for. Juna would just smirk. And somewhere in the wind, the dust whispered back. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story filled with grit, fire, and fierce devotion, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Saddlehorn Stories for more tales that ride hard and cut deep. And now we want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were Colt or Juna in that final moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's talk about it. This Wild West might be gone, but the stories still burn.